Well, hello there, and welcome to Stories by Will. I am your host, Will, and today we're going to keep reading from the book Tales Told in Holland. Um, Last time we talked about there's this character named Ty Ulenspiegel, and he actually has six different stories about him in this book. So last time we covered stories one and two. Today we're going to cover stories three and four. So the first one is going to be Tyle and the Emperor Charles, and that one's a little bit short. So the second one is going to be much longer, and that's the Adventures of Tyle and Lammy Goodfellow. So that one's going to have a lot more of the Dutch and German words in it, so it's going to be a little bit more difficult for me to pronounce some of those. So if you can bear with me. Like I said, this book was last published in 1948. I learned to read from it as a child about 51, 52 years ago. So these are kind of cold readings for me. And if you bear with me, we will get into the first one. Before I do, if you're here, please leave a like and subscribe and share it out to friends and family. Anybody who's got kids, I think would be good bedtime stories to just, put it on rotate. And okay, let's jump into it. So, Tyle and the Emperor Charles. So, by and by, Tyle came to the city of Oudenaarde, which a garrison of the Emperor Charles hired soldiers was defending. For the King of France had sent troops into Flanders, and they were laying waste to the land like a swarm of grasshoppers. Now, the captain of the Emperor's hired soldiers was a rascal named Cornjan, and he and his men stole chickens, ducks, pigeons, calves, and pigs from the country folk in a manner little less high-handed than that of the French. One day, Cornjan found Tyle asleep beneath a tree. "What do you do for a living?" asked Cornjan, awakening Tyle with the dig in the ribs. "I dance on the ropes," said Tyle. "I paint pretty faces, carve knife handles, play the rumble pot, and blow the trumpet." And this last, he said, because he had heard that on the castle of Oudenaarde was a position of tower watchman was vacant. "You shall be trumpeter of the city," said Corjun. Then he took Ulenspiegel to the top of the highest tower on the fortification and told him that he was to watch out for the enemy and blow his trumpet if he saw them coming. This was all very well for the emperor's soldiers, for after all, they set themselves to feasting and troubled themselves not at all about the enemy. Neither did they trouble themselves to give Ulenspiegel more than the barest necessities of food and drink, but they left the watching to him, while they made merry below. Now, after some weeks which passed in this manner, Oudenaarde received news that the gracious Emperor Charles V was to visit the city with his high and noble routine. On this occasion, Ulenspiegel was given still less to eat and commanded to watch out still more sharply. He was to blow his trumpet the very moment his majesty came into view, order that the city council might have time to ring the bells, get the fireworks ready, place the meat in the oven, and open the cask of wines for the feasting. That he might perform his duty more certainly, the alderman gave him a pair of spectacles. One day when the wind blew from the Brabant and the sky was clear, Tyle put on the spectacles and saw the emperor coming. But alack, Tyle was very empty in stomach. He said to himself that he had been set up there to watch out against the coming of their enemy, the French, and was no business of his to blow the trumpet merrily to awaken a false and silly display at the coming of the emperor who beat and burned his people. It would do the emperor good to fast for once in his life. Let the emperor know what it felt like to have an empty stomach. So Tile did not blow his trumpet. Laughing and talking, the imperial party came on, steeds prancing, plumes waving, cloth of gold glistening. But as his majesty drew nearer the gate, he was surprised and dissatisfied to find that no bells were ringing to announce of his coming. Meantime, a farmer, mistaking the newcomer for Frenchman, came running to the city crying out, "Our foes are coming!" Whereat the gatekeeper shut and locked the gate. More and more angry grew the emperor at hearing no bells nor thundering of cannons. In vain did he prick up his ears. He heard nothing but the chimes which played the half hour. And when he arrived before the city, he found its gates fast closed. When he Then he fell to pounding imperiously on the panels, and the gentleman of his routine, angry like himself, demanded instant admission. But the gatekeeper, who stood high on the fortification, shouted to them that they should keep still, or he would send rains of bullets, which would cool their impatience a little. Grown altogether furious at this, his majesty cried, "Blind pig, don't you recognize your emperor?" To which the gatekeeper answered that pigs with the most guilt on were usually the biggest pigs. Then didn't the emperor rage? "If you don't open this gate, I'll have you roasted alive." Such a noise at this at length brought an old soldier to the spot. He looked over the wall and cried to the gatekeeper, "You are wrong. That is our emperor. I know him well." Hearing this awful truth, the gatekeeper fell in a faint, while the soldier took the key and opened the gates. When he had entered the city, the emperor demanded stormily why they had let him wait so long. The soldiers explained the case, whereat his majesty sternly commanded that Corngen's troops should appear at once before him. When they had come all in haste, he ordered them to ride before him, beating the tambourines and playing the pipes. And then at last the bells woke up, one after another. They began to ring. With his escort and sufficient imperial noise, his majesty arrived at the marketplace. Burgomasters and aldermen were all having a meeting at that moment in the city hall. But Alderman Jan Guglier rushed into the midst like one mad. "Emperor Charles is here," they shouted. Frightened out of their wits, burgomasters, aldermen, and councillors all ran out of the hall to greet their emperor, while their boys went scurrying around the city to prepare the fireworks, to open the cask, and to put capons on the fire. Then the emperor asked the burgomasters if they did not deserve to be hanged for a lack of respect to their sovereign lord. The burgomasters answered that they deserved this indeed, but that Ulenspiegel, the tower watchman, deserved it more. He had been put on the tower to watch for his majesty's coming, and he had been given spectacles, extra good spectacles, with which to watch. Yet he had not blown his trumpet. "Hang the wretch!" cried the emperor. So they brought Ulenspiegel and dragged him along by the collar to the gallows. There he was hoisted on the ladder, and the hangman put the rope around his neck. But the common folk, who loved Tile and thought of his offenses too small to merit such a punishment, cried out, "Mercy, mercy for Ulenspiegel!" At this, the emperor lifted his hand and spake pompously, as if to impress them all with his sense of the limitless power of whom they had failed to sufficiently honor. I am the emperor. All power on earth is mine. Whatever I will, I do. If this good for nothing can ask of me anything that I cannot do, I will let him live. Then the woman wept and said, Poor boy, he must die, for the emperor can do anything. Nevertheless, they cried one and all, Speak, Ulenspiegel, speak. Ulenspiegel thought for a moment, and then he answered solemnly, This one thing only I will ask, that his majesty come and kiss me on the mouth, with I cannot speak Dutch. Hearing this unexpected answer, the emperor burst into laughter. I cannot do what you ask, he said. Therefore, you will not be hanged. Nevertheless, he sentenced the burgomasters and the aldermen of the city to wear spectacles on the back of their heads for 6 months, so that, if those of Oudenarde cannot see in front, they can at least see behind, he said. And, by imperial decree, the spectacles are still on the coat of arms of that city. And that is the end of our third story of Ulenspiegel. So all of these stories, they all have different ethics and morals behind it. So if you happen to see anything there, drop a comment below and we can discuss it if you want, or just love to hear your opinions. So we're going to go ahead and just move into the fourth story. This is a little bit longer, definitely dated, and so this is really cool. So this one is story number 4, The Adventures of Tyle and Lemmy Goodfellow. Now soon after this, Emperor Charles grew weary of the burden of ruling his mighty empire. So in the year 1555, he turned the crown with great ceremony over to Philip, and putting off all his splendor, he went to live in a monastery. Then was Philip king alone, and the throne, and the crown, and the robes of state, and the royal orb were his. And at this was the worse for the Flanders and the lowlands. For Philip, Sourface, was as obstinate as a mule, and he had thought that his own will ought to dominate the whole world as though it had been the will of God. But the Dutchmen would neither surrender to him in their independence of mind, nor disgorge him their ducats. It's their gold money. Excuse me. The flame of resistance began to burn and run through all the land. And William of Orange, called William the Silent, with the counts of Egmont and Horn, and other powerful nobles of Flanders and the lowlands, rose up to save their people from the direful power of Spain. When things came to such a pass, Philip set sail from Flushing and returned once more to Spain. Nor did he ever again set foot on the land that had defied him. But he made his sister, Margaret of Parma, governor in his stead, and he had left 4,000 Spanish troops to enforce his will on the land. One day, 300 nobles of the Netherlands, one fine day, 300 nobles of the Netherlands, led by Harry of Brederode and Louis of Nassau, the gallant brothers of William the Silent, went to Margaret of Parma in her palace at Brussels to entreat her to use her influence with King Philip to soften the burdens, indignities, and punishments with which he had heaped upon them. Frightened at the sight of such a large throng, Margaret trembled, but one of her followers, Berlaymont, stadtholder of Namur, and members of the Council of State attempted to reassure her. Looking about at the nobles of the Netherlands, who were dressed with conspicuous plainness and carried no weapons whatever, he cried with great scorn, "Have no fear, my lady, they are naught but a pack of beggars. Naught but a pack of beggars." That might be a banquet at the home of Henry of Brederode. It was kind of weird. "No fear, my lady, they are not but a pack of beggars. Not but a pack of be a banquet at the home of Henry of Brederode, and the young nobles adopted the name beggars. And the Prince of Orange, with the Counts of Egmont and Horn, who dropped in on the revelry, joined the merry scene and drank the beggarman's health. Thenceforward it became the fashion for patriots to wear beggars' garb with a medal around their necks, and to call themselves beggarmen. Then Philip recalled Margaret of Parma as governor of the Netherlands and sent to replace her the Duke of Alva, a man as hard as iron, as hard as the as hard as the iron of captured cannon with which he caused to be made a statue of himself. In no time at all, the Iron Duke had cut off the heads of the Counts of Egmont and Horn, and William of Orange forced to flee into Germany for safety. Having lost all he had in the lowlands, William sold his gold and silver, gathered together an army, and came back again into Holland. And Tyle fell in with an old friend, Lammy Goodfellow, who was as huge as an ox, but peaceable as a lamb, whence he had his name of Lammy. And the two joined the beggarman, though Lammy had never before attacked a single living thing save a chicken or a goose. Excuse me. Thenceforward, by day and night, the fires of the beggarmen were to be seen flaring up or dying down in the woods, and the peasants brought them such bread and bacon as they could. "Look at these fine fellows, Lammy," cried Ulenspiegel, "fierce and talkative, resolute and proud, and wandered through the woods, and they are armed with hatchets and halberds, with long swords, arquebuses, pikes, lances, crossbows. Long live the beggarman!" Thereafter, Ulenspiegel applied himself most diligently to the duties as a soldier, worked his arquebus most skillfully, and kept his eyes and ears wide open. But as to Lammy, despite that he was so big and powerful as to make men tremble before him, he felt ill at ease in warfare because of the softness and gentleness of his heart. Now it came to pass that the attempts of the Prince of Orange and his friends to gain a stronghold in the Netherlands were all in vain. By land they failed, and the feet of the lowlands took dark indeed. Then one day, William the Silent said to Tyle and Lammy, "I would have you go for me to the North Bramble, Getherland, Overijssel, and the north of Holland, telling the people everywhere that, although we have failed on land, we will yet continue the struggle for freedom by sea. On your journey, Count those worthy of your trust, who answer the song of the lark with a warlike cockcrow. So Tile dressed himself in a short cloak and a shabby doublet and a hose that was made after the Spanish fashion, and with a plumed cap on his head, he and Lammy departed from the camp. Many a day they wandered astride their donkeys, Jeff and Jan, and many adventures befell them. But at last they drew nigh into the Maastricht. Not far from the town they came to a farm. There Ulenspiegel whistled like a lark, and from inside the house there answered the sound of a warlike cockcrow. After that a jolly-looking farmer appeared at the door to greet them. So the ham was crackling in the frying pan, and the sausages likewise. And the boys and the girls of the farm came, one after another, and thrust their nose into the half-open door to gaze on Lammy in wonder and at the amount that he could eat. But the farmer said to Tile, "You cannot go into Maastricht, for the Duke's army is camped in front of the town and all around it on every side." With that, he conducted his visitors to the top loft whence they could see the standards of the army's cavalry and the infantry moving about in the distance over the plain. Nevertheless, Tile said, "Fear not. I have a plan to get through the army's lines and to take with me some of these good lads of yours who are longing to get to see the river, and so to the sea to join the sea beggars. I'm going to pretend that I am a bridegroom. You shall furnish me with a pretty bride, and then you shall see what will happen." So all the men put on their best clothes, their doublets and hose of velvet, and the great opera cleed overall. As for the women, their skirts were of black wool, with broad stripes of black velvet thereupon. Round their necks they wore white ruffs. Their bodices were embroidered in gold, scarlet, and blue, and their shoes had silver buckles. At noon, while the sun shone from the clear sky and the fresh breeze was blowing, the wedding carriages started off, all decorated with paper flowers and wreaths of fir and holly. In the first cart were Tile and Lammy and she, who pretended to be the bride. In the second, which was drawn by Jeff and Jan, his donkeys, rode the musicians playing on drums and fifes, bagpipes and shawms. Last of all came two wagons loaded with wedding guests. Flags flying, the music playing, they rode up the highway to the town. When the sentries saw them coming, they ran to the Duke and cried, "The enemy is at hand!" The Duke at once sent to warn the colonels and the captains, and himself ordered the army to be massed in battle array. But as the carriages drew near, it was seen that they contained none but men and women, dancing and singing, and playing most joyously on fifes and drums, on bagpipes and shawms. When the procession had been brought to a halt, the Duke himself came up, attracted by the din that came from all those instruments. And he saw naught but a bride and a bridegroom, covered with flowers. Then all the other peasants, both men and women, got down from their chariots, began to dance on the ground, and offer good food and drink to the soldiers. The Duke and his friends were much astonished at the simplicity of these peasants. Look how they sang and made merry when all around them was an army ready for battle. And when the cavalcade moved off, far from holding them back, the soldiers, in high good humor, let off a volley of musketry in honor of the bride. Thus they came into safety of the Maastricht, wherence the peasants made their way down to the river Maas, to the sea beggars, while Ulenspiegel took counsel with the agents of the prince as to the best way of sending ships loaded with arms and munitions to the assistance of the fleet. The Duke was not long in learning the trick which had been played upon him. Thenceforward the Dutchman sang, "Bloody Duke, silly Duke, hast thou seen the bride?" And whenever he made a mistake, the enemies cried, "The Duke, he can't see clearly, he has seen the bride." That was ditching the Duke for falling to the tricks. Now in those days, Lammy and Ulenspiegel were walking along the banks of the Maas, near the town of Maastricht, and Lammy saw that Ulenspiegel gazed attentively at all the boats on the river. Suddenly he came to stand before one, on the prow of which stood a figure of a mermaid. Then Ulenspiegel began to sing like a lark. A man appeared on the boat and answered with a cockcrow. At this, Ulenspiegel set up a noise like a donkey bray, which the man immediately echoed with interest. And the two donkeys, Jep and Jan, laid back their ears and joined in the chorus. Then Tyle said to Lamy, "This boatman is making a mock of us and our good steeds. What do you say to going and attacking him in his boat?" But sundry men and women, who were riding along the tow path on the backs of the horses which pulled the barges, cried out in warning, "If you don't want to be broken to bits, let this Stecker Pier bay at his ease. He is the strongest man in Maastricht." "Eeyaw, eeyaw, eeyaw," went the boatman. But Ulenspiegel proudly answered the people, "He is nothing to us, your Peter the Strong. For however strong he is, we are stronger. See my friend Lammy here? He could deal with this man as though he were a gnat." "What's this you're saying, my son?" demanded Lammy in alarm. "The truth," answered Ulenspiegel, "and do not let your modesty contradict me. Your strength is famous far and wide." "Eeyaw, eeyaw," went the boatman. Then Ulenspiegel said aloud to the boatman, "If you are Stirk Pier, I am Tyle Ulenspiegel, and these two here are our donkeys, Jep and Jan, and they know how to bray better than you do, for that is their natural way of talking." "Eeyaw, eeyaw," scornfully cried the boatman. So Tyle and Lammy dismounted from their donkeys, jumped into a little skiff, and steered straight for the boat. Tyle mounted to the deck by the help of a rope, and Lammy climbed up in front of him, puffing and blowing. Arrived on the bridge of the boat, Ulenspiegel leant down as to lace his boots, and at the same time spoke a word into the ear of the boatman, who straightway laughed, and gave Lammy a curious look. Then he began to roar out at him every kind of insult, calling him a coward and a huge lump of fat, and names even far worse than these. It was midday. The workmen who had labored on the dike and the road menders and the builders of ships were about to take their repast of beans and boiled beef, lunchtime, which had been brought to them by their women folk or their children. All these came crowding to the shore and began to laugh and to clap their hands at the prospect of a fight. All of a sudden, Lammy threw himself like a mad bull upon the boatman, knocked him down, and began to beat him with all his might. And the boatman suffered himself to be thus dealt with, despite the fact that he was making a great pretense at resistance all the time. Then the men and women who were watching the battle from the bank were astonished and clapped their hands to exclaim to each other, "Who would have thought that this fat man could be so fiery?" "Beg for mercy," cried Lammy, kneeling on the enemy's breast. At this the boatman began to cough, and demanded mercy with the sign of a hand, whereat, in generous fashion, Lammy picked him up. Straightway his adversary turned his back toward the onlookers and stuck out his tongue at Tyle, who was rocking with laughter to see Lammy proudly shaking up the feathers of his cap and walking about in triumph. "Long live the conqueror of Sterpier!" cried the good folk on the shore. And the boatman, having made his peace with Lammy, said, "Since you are men of valiant heart, knowing well the song of the lark, the bird of freedom, the warlike clarion of the cock, and the bray of the ass withal, come with me, and I shall show you what's cooking in my kitchen." So saying, he led the way into the hold, where, removing certain planks from the floor, he disclosed great piles of guns and powder. "Where am I to take these?" asked Tyle. "To Emden, through the North Sea," said Ulenspiegel. "Good beggarman that you are." "The sea is big," said the boatman. "But for the battle," said Ulenspiegel. "God is with us," said the boatman. "Who can be against us?" cried Ulenspiegel. When they had thus spoken, the boatman conducted Lammy and Ulenspiegel on deck with many words of cheer and good counsel. Then the two rowed to the bank, where they mounted their donkeys again. "My son," said Lammy, as they ambled gently along, "pray tell me why you did that. Strong as he is, allow me to beat him so cruelly." "To the end," answered Ulenspiegel, that wherever we go, the fear of your prowess may go before us. That, indeed, will prove more a powerful escort than 20 Lancashires. For who would dare to measure his strength with Lammy, the mighty Lammy, the conqueror, who overcame in sight of all the beholders of the famous Stirk Pier, and threw him to the ground like a feather? "You say well, my son," said Lammy, drawing himself up proudly. Then Lammy passed along the road, saluting right and left like the king, and the fame of his valor followed him from village to village and town to town. And Lammy had let his beard grow to make him look more fierce, and Ulenspiegel called him Lammy the Lion. But Lammy did not continue on his purpose regarding the beard longer than the fourth day, because the hairs began to tickle him, and he passed the razor over the first surface of his victorious countenance, so that it appeared thereafter like his own face once more, round and full as the sun, ablaze with the flame of good nature. So they wended along by the bank of the river and canal, and everywhere the song of the cock answered the song of the lark. And wherever they went, they found, in the sacred cause of liberty, weapons were being forged and armor furbished, to be carried away in the ships that stood along the coast. And that brings us to the end of our fourth story. And that's actually going to lead us into our fifth story, which is called The Sea Beggars. And I believe, without looking forward, that's going to get us into more of what's going on And that one is quite longer, about 9 pages or so. So with this, I'm going to draw our story for today to a close. I would really like to thank everybody, especially all my current subscribers, for sticking with me for the past year and a half. For those of you watching, please hit the like and subscribe button. And if you would please share. I'm trying to get this stream growing. So I desperately need to get some teeth back in my mouth. So things will be much better in the future. Then we can start focusing on some of the other news of the day and morals and ethics of the world, that type of thing. So I appreciate it. So we're currently on page 131 of a total of 189. So we got about almost 60 pages left to read. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for everything. And I'll see you on the next one. Ciao.